Hannah Park wiped down the counter of her small cafe for the third time that morning. The metal surface gleamed under the artificial lights of orbital station Kepler 9. Outside her window, aliens of every shape and size walked past. Some had scales, some had fur, and some looked like they were made of rocks. But none of them ever came into her CFE acute. She sold coffee and pastries, just like the cafes back on Earth, but here nobody wanted them. The aliens on this station ate nutrition paste from tubes. It gave them everything they needed to survive. They thought her food was strange and wasteful. Hannah sighed and looked at the empty tables. She had been on this station for 6 months now. The Earth government called her a cultural ambassador, but that was just a fancy title. Really, she was just a baker with no customers. Then she saw him again. The small creature sitting on the bench across from her cafe. He came every day for the past week, always alone. He was about the size of a human 5-year-old, with rusty orange fur and big golden eyes. His species was called Velroxy. They looked like foxes that walked on 2 legs. The cub sat very still, watching the people walk by. His ears drooped down and his tail wrapped around his small body. Hannah felt her heart squeeze. She knew that look. That was the look of someone who felt very alone. She had seen him arrive on the station a month ago with his parent. The adult Velroxy worked at the cargo docks. Hannah often saw the parent leaving early in the morning and coming back late at night. The cub was left alone for most of the day. Today Hannah made a decision. She went to her kitchen and pulled out her mixing bowl. Flour, sugar, butter, eggs, and chocolate chips. She had brought these ingredients from Earth at great expense. She had been saving them for something special. What could be more special than a lonely child? She mixed the dough with practiced hands. The smell of baking cookies soon filled her cafe. It was a smell that reminded her of her grandmother's kitchen back in Seoul, a smell that meant home, safety, and love. When the cookies came out of the oven, golden brown and perfect, Hannah put one on a small plate. She took a deep breath and walked outside. The cub looked up at her with those big golden eyes. Up close, she could see that his fur was a bit dirty and his clothes were worn. He tilted his head, confused about why this human was approaching him. "Hello," Hannah said softly. She knew he wore a translator device on his collar. "My name is Hannah. I made something for you." She held out the plate with the cookie. The cub stared at it. Then he looked back at her. His small nose twitched as he smelled the cookie. His translator made a soft beeping sound as it tried to process his words. "What is it?" he asked. His voice was high and uncertain. "It's called a cookie," Hannah said. She sat down on the bench next to him, but not too close. She didn't want to scare him. "It's food, but it's special food. We make it to taste good, not just to fill our stomachs." The cub reached out one clawed hand and carefully took the cookie. He sniffed it again. Then, very slowly, he took a small bite. Hannah watched as his eyes went wide. His ears perked straight up. His tail started wagging so fast it became a blur. He made a sound that the translator couldn't quite capture, something between a gasp and a chirp. "This ... thus." The translator struggled. "Happy mouth, happy, warm, sweet, I don't have words." The cub ate the rest of the cookie in 3 quick bites. Then he looked at Hannah with wonder in his eyes. His small body was trembling. "Why?" he asked. "Why give this to me?" Hannah felt tears starting in her eyes, but she smiled. "Because you looked like you needed something nice. And where I come from, we share food with people who need kindness." The cub stared at her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he leaned against her side. He was warm and soft, and she could feel him shaking a little. "My name is Pip," he said quietly. "My parent works all day. I sit here because I can see many people, but nobody talks to me. Nobody ever gave me something before." Hannah put her hand gently on his head. "Well, Pip, you can come by my cafe anytime. I'll make sure you get a cookie every day. How does that sound?" Pip looked up at her, and his golden eyes were shining. "Every day?" "Every day," Hannah promised. The next morning, Pip was waiting outside her cafe before she even opened. He had a piece of paper in his hands. When Hannah came out, he shyly held it up. It was a drawing done in crayon. It showed a human and a Velroxy cub sitting together, with something round and brown between them. "I made this for you," Pip said. "My parent says that gifts should be traded. I don't have money, but I can draw." Hannah took the drawing like it was made of gold. "This is beautiful, Pip. Thank you. Come on, let's get you today's cookie." As they walked into the cafe together, Hannah didn't notice the other small alien watching from around the corner. She didn't see the way its eyes focused on the cookie in Pip's hand. She didn't know that word was already starting to spread through the lower decks of the station. Something amazing was happening in the humans' cafe. Something that tasted like joy and felt like kindness. And in the cold metal corridors of Orbital Station Kepler-9, that was more valuable than all the credits in the galaxy. Pip ate his cookie slowly that morning, making it last as long as possible. And for the first time since arriving at this station, he didn't feel alone. 2 weeks had passed since Hannah gave Pip his first cookie. Every morning, he waited outside her cafe with a new drawing. Every morning, she gave him a fresh cookie and they would sit together for a few minutes before she opened for the day. But on this morning, Pip was not alone. 3 small creatures stood behind him. They were Thraxi, an insect-like species with shiny blue shells and multiple legs. They were smaller than Pip, barely reaching Hannah's knee. Their large compound eyes reflected the station's lights like jewels. "Hannah," Pip said, his tail wagging nervously. "These are my friends. I told them about the cookies." The 3 Thraxi younglings huddled together, looking scared. One of them clicked and chirped, and its translator device spoke in a tiny voice. "We not mean trouble. Pip say you have food that makes happy. We never have happy food before?" Hannah's heart melted. She knelt down to their level. "No trouble at all. Wait here, I'll be right back." She went inside and quickly baked a new batch. She had to adjust the recipe a bit, making the cookies smaller. When she came back out, she had a plate with 7 cookies. 1 for Pip, and 2 for each of the Thraxi younglings. The Thraxi took the cookies with their small front legs, handling them like precious treasures. When they bit into them, their antennae started vibrating rapidly. The translator struggled to keep up with their excited clicking. "Sweet! Is sweet. Never tasted sweet before. What is this feeling? Is like sunshine inside mouth. Why nobody tell us food can be like this?" Hannah laughed, watching them enjoy the cookies. Pip sat proudly beside them, like he had discovered something wonderful and was sharing it with the world. But the happiness didn't last long. A week later, Administrator Taiyangcho came to her cafe. He was a tall human man with tired eyes and gray hair. He worked for the Earth government, managing the human section of the station. "Hannah," he said, sitting at one of her empty tables. "We need to talk." She brought him coffee and sat across from him. "Is something wrong?" "I've been getting reports," Taiyang said carefully. "You've been feeding alien juveniles. Do you understand the risks? We don't fully know how Earth food affects other species. What if someone gets sick?" "I've been careful," Hannah said. "I research each species before I give them anything. And I only give small amounts. That's not the only issue." Taiyang rubbed his face. "You're creating dependencies. These children are coming to rely on you. What happens when you leave? What happens if you run out of supplies?" Before Hannah could answer, the cafe door opened. A large Velroxy adult entered, walking on all 4 legs. It was Pip's parent, Velker. The alien stood up on 2 legs and looked at Taiyang, then at Hannah. "You are the human who feeds my cub," Velker said. The translator made his voice sound deep and formal. Hannah nodded, suddenly nervous. "Yes, I hope that's okay. I should have asked permission first." Velker stared at her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, the alien bowed his head. "I work 16 hours every day. I make barely enough credits to keep us housed and fed. I give Pip nutrition paste because it is cheap and efficient, but it is not good. It does not bring joy." The alien's golden eyes, so much like Pip's, looked directly at Hannah. "Since you started feeding him, my cub has changed. He draws now. He makes friends. He waits for me at the door and tells me about his day. Before, he just sat in the corner, quiet and sad. Velker reached into a pouch and pulled out a small bag of credits. I do not have much, but please let me pay you. Hannah gently pushed the credits back. No payment. Pip gives me drawings. That's payment enough. Velker stared at her like she was speaking a language without translation. You do this for nothing? Why? Because, Hannah said simply, that's what you do when you see someone who needs kindness. After Velker left, Taiyang looked at Hannah with a strange expression. You're going to cause problems, you know that? Maybe, Hannah said. But they're the good kind of problems. The word continued to spread. The 3 Thraxi younglings went home and told their hive mates. Those younglings told others. Soon, parents from different species were asking questions. What was this baking concept? Why did food need to taste good? What was the human doing that made their children so happy? One day, a Kravik merchant came to her cafe. The Kraviks were large reptilian beings with rough scales and powerful jaws. This one was old, with scars across his face and cloudy eyes. I hear you make food that brings joy, the merchant said. His voice was rough, like stones grinding together. I try, Hannah said. I will pay you 500 credits for 12 of these cookies. Hannah shook her head. I don't sell them. I give them away, the merchant stared at her. Why? Because joy shouldn't cost money. She went to her kitchen and made a fresh batch. When she brought them out on a plate, the merchant took one with a trembling claw. He bit into it carefully. The massive alien sat down on her floor and began to cry. Deep, shaking sobs that made his whole body shake. Hannah knelt beside him, alarmed. Are you okay? Did I do something wrong? No, the merchant gasped. No, you did something right. My species, we stopped making food like this 300 years ago. We had resource wars. Food became only fuel. We forgot that it could be. Could be this? He looked at her with tears running down his scaled face. I forgot what joy tastes like. I am 200 years old and I forgot. Thank you, human. Thank you for reminding me. After the merchant left, carrying his cookies like they were made of diamonds, Hannah sat down and cried too. She had just wanted to help one lonely cub. She hadn't expected this. The next morning, when she opened her cafe, she found 30 alien younglings waiting in line outside. Behind them were their parents, looking curious and hopeful. Hannah looked at her kitchen. She had enough supplies for maybe 40 cookies. But the line kept growing as she watched. More younglings arrived, some she had never seen before. Species she didn't even recognize. Her hands were shaking as she started mixing dough. This was bigger than she had planned. Much bigger. But when she looked out at all those hopeful faces, all those children who had never tasted joy before, she knew she couldn't stop. She would just have to find a way to make more cookies. 3 days had passed since the line first formed. Now it stretched around the corner. Hannah counted heads and her stomach dropped. Over 200 beings stood waiting. Cubs, hatchlings, pups, younglings of every species on the station. Some elderly aliens had joined too, curious about what their children kept talking about. It was 4 a.m. Hannah hadn't slept properly in days. Her arms ached from mixing dough. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, but she kept baking. You need to rest, said Ji-Hoon Kong, her assistant. He was a young human man who had volunteered to help when he saw how overwhelmed she was. He worked the morning shift at the docking bay, then came to help her in the afternoons. I can't, Hannah said, pulling another tray from the oven. Look at them. How can I tell them no? Through her window she could see Pip at the front of the line. He had appointed himself as her helper, organizing the younger children and making sure everyone waited patiently. He wore a little badge he had made himself that said, Cookie Assistant in 3 languages, but there were problems. Big problems. Her supplies were running out fast. Earth ingredients were expensive and had to be shipped across the galaxy. She had spent all her savings and was now using her monthly salary to buy more flour and sugar. Soon, she would run out of money completely. And she wasn't the only one with problems. The other food vendors on the station were angry. A Tholen merchant who sold nutrition paste had filed an official complaint. His sales had dropped by 40% since Hannah's line started forming. She's engaging in unfair competition, the merchant told the station council. She gives away food for free. How can we compete with free? Administrator Taiyang had called her to his office twice already. The warnings were getting more serious. You need to stop this, Hannah, or I'll have no choice but to shut you down. But every time she thought about stopping, she would see Pip's face, or the Thraxi triplets, or the old Kravik merchant who had cried in her cafe. A Draxi elder had waited in line for 6 hours yesterday. The Draxi were silicon-based beings who looked like walking crystals. They normally didn't eat organic food at all, but Hannah had developed a special cookie made with mineral compounds that they could digest when the elder tasted it. She had stood completely still for a full minute. Then she had spoken in a voice like singing glass. I am 90 years old. I thought I knew everything the universe had to offer, but this is new. This is wonder. Thank you, human. How could she stop when moments like that kept happening? On the 4th day, everything came crashing down. Hannah received an official notice from the station administration. Cease unauthorized food distribution immediately. Failure to comply will result in deportation from orbital station Kepler 9. She stood in her cafe, holding the notice with shaking hands. Ji-hoon looked at her with worry in his eyes. What are you going to do? He asked. Hannah looked out at the line. It was longer than ever today. Over 200 beings waiting patiently. Some had been there since dawn. I don't know, she whispered. But the decision was taken out of her hands. Pip had been at the front of the line when a parent showed him the notice. The little Velroxy cub read it, and his ears went flat against his head. He looked at all the younglings behind him, then back at the notice. Then he started walking toward the administration building. The entire line followed. Him. 200 beings marched through the station corridors. Younglings holding hands with other younglings. Parents joining their children. The old Kravik merchant walking with the Draxi elder. They gathered outside Administrator Taiyang's office and sat down. They didn't shout. They didn't damage anything. They just sat there, peacefully, and refused to move. Pip stood at the front, his small voice amplified by a borrowed speaker system. Hannah did nothing wrong. She gave us something our parents couldn't give us. She showed us that strangers can be kind. She taught us that food can be more than fuel. She made us happy. A Thraxi youngling clicked forward. My parent works in engineering. They have no time for cookies, but Hannah had time. She learned what we could eat. She made special cookies just for us. More voices joined in, each child telling their story. Each one explaining what Hannah's cookies meant to them. The adults started speaking too. Velker, Pip's parent, spoke about how his cub had transformed from sad and lonely to confident and kind. The Kravik merchant spoke about remembering joy after 300 years of forgetting. Inside his office. Taeyang watched through the window. He had expected anger when he issued the order. He had expected humans to protest, but he hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected the aliens to care so much. Beside him stood the Tholen merchant who had filed the complaint, along with several council members from different species. This is exactly the problem, the Tholen merchant said. She's created a dependency. Look at them. They're protesting over cookies? But one of the council members, an elderly Asari with feathers and wise eyes, shook her head. They're not protesting over cookies. They're protesting because someone showed them kindness, and now we want to take that away. Kindness is not measurable, the Tholen argued. It has no value in economics. Maybe that's our mistake, the Asari said softly. The sit-in lasted for 8 hours. The younglings sang songs. They shared the last cookies Hannah had managed to make. They told stories to each other. And they waited. Finally, Taiyang came out of his office. The crowd went silent. 200 pairs of eyes watched him. He looked at them all. Then he looked at Pip, standing at the front with his little badge and his trembling legs and his determined golden eyes. Taiyang thought about his own childhood. He had grown up in an orphanage on Earth. There had been a teacher there, an old woman who baked bread every Sunday. She always made sure every child got a piece, fresh and warm. She had told them, You might not have parents, but you have me, and I will always make sure you're fed and loved. That teacher was why he had joined the diplomatic corps. That teacher was why he believed humans had something valuable to offer the galaxy. And now Hannah was being that teacher for 200 alien children. The complaint is dismissed, Taiyang announced. His voice carried across the corridor. Hannah Park will be granted a cultural exchange permit. Her activities are officially recognized as diplomatic cultural sharing. The crowd erupted in cheers. Younglings jumped and danced. Parents embraced. Pip looked up at the administrator with tears in his golden eyes. However, Taiyang continued, and the crowd went quiet again, this cannot continue unsustainably. We will need to find a solution that allows this cultural exchange to grow without exhausting our resources or our people. He looked directly at Hannah, who had come to see what was happening. You started something beautiful. Now we need to figure out how to make it last. Hannah nodded, tears streaming down her face. Behind her, Ji-hoon was already taking notes. His mind working on solutions. The line of 200 began to disperse, happy and hopeful. But they would be back tomorrow. They would always come back. Because Hannah had taught them something their advanced civilizations had forgotten. Joy doesn't come from efficiency. Connection doesn't come from optimization. Sometimes the most important things in life are small, simple, and given freely. Sometimes all you need is a cookie and someone who cares enough to bake it for you. The emergency council hearing was scheduled for the next morning. Hannah barely slept. She kept thinking about what she would say, how she would explain. Ji-hoon stayed up with her, helping her organize her thoughts. Just tell them the truth, he said. Tell them why you started this. The council chamber was a large, circular room with seats arranged in a ring. Representatives from 12 different species sat in their designated sections. The Tholen merchant who had filed the original complaint sat in the accusation seat. Hannah sat across from him in the defense position. Administrator Taiyang stood at the center. This hearing will determine whether human cultural Ambassador Hannah Park's activities constitute cultural exchange or cultural interference. Please present your case. The Tholen merchant stood. His crystalline body caught the light, making him look cold and sharp. Honorable council members, this is a simple case. The human is distributing food products that create emotional responses through chemical compounds. She targets juveniles who cannot make informed decisions. This is manipulation, not cultural exchange. He projected data onto the central screen. Since her activities began, purchases of standard nutrition products have decreased. Work productivity in some sectors has dropped because parents are spending time in her line instead of working. She has disrupted the economic and social order of this station. The Tholen pointed at Hannah. Worst of all, she creates dependency. These younglings now believe they need her cookies to be happy. What happens when she leaves? What happens when the supplies run out? She has created a problem that she cannot sustain. Several council members nodded. The arguments made logical sense. Then it was Hannah's turn to speak. She stood up, her legs shaking. She had never spoken to so many important people before. She could see dozens of faces watching her, some curious, some skeptical, some already decided against her. I'm just a baker, she started. I'm not a diplomat or a scientist. I don't know fancy words, but I know food, and I know what food means to humans. She pulled up images on the screen. Pictures from Earth, families gathered around tables, birthday cakes with candles, grandmothers teaching grandchildren to cook, food markets full of colors and smells. On Earth, we don't just eat to survive. We eat to celebrate. We eat when we're sad, and we eat when we're happy. We gather around food. We show love by feeding people. When someone is sick, we make them soup. When someone has a birthday, we bake them a cake. When strangers come to our home, we offer them a meal. She looked around the chamber. Food is how we connect to each other. It's how we show we care. It's how we turn strangers into friends and friends into family. That's all I was doing. I saw a lonely child and I did what any human would do. I fed him. Not because I wanted something from him. Not because I was trying to manipulate him, but because that's what you do when you see someone who needs kindness. The Tholen merchant interrupted. Emotional responses to chemical compounds are not kindness. They are biological reactions. Maybe, Hannah said. But the time I spend baking? The effort I put into learning what each species can safely eat? The moment I spend sitting with Pip while he has his cookie? That's not biology. That's choice. That's caring. The council members murmured among themselves. Then Velker stood up. He had been sitting in the witness section. I request permission to speak, the Velroxy said. Taiyang nodded. Please proceed. Velker walked to the center of the chamber. His rusty orange fur was neatly groomed, and he stood tall on his hind legs. I am a cargo loader. I work 16 hours a day. I do this to support my cub, but working to support him means I have no time to actually be with him. His voice cracked slightly. Before Hannah, my cub was silent and sad. He sat alone every day. I gave him everything he needed to survive, but I could not give him what he needed to live. I did not know the difference. Velker looked at Hannah with gratitude in his golden eyes. This human taught me that survival is not the same as living. She gave my cub something I could not give him. Not because she wanted payment, not because she wanted power, but because she saw a child who needed someone to care. Next, the old Kravik merchant stood. I am 300 years old. I have traveled to 40 worlds. I have made fortunes and lost them. I thought I understood the universe. He held up one of Hannah's cookies, carefully preserved in a container. This small thing taught me I was wrong. My species abandoned food culture during our resource wars. We decided that taste and joy were wasteful. We optimized everything for efficiency. His voice dropped low. But we forgot something important. We forgot what it feels like to experience wonder. We forgot that sometimes the best things in life are small and simple and given freely. This human remembered. Or perhaps humans never forgot. A council member, a Vryn with multiple tentacles, spoke up. This is all very emotional, but the Tholen raises valid concerns. What about the economic disruption? What about dependency? Dr. Sora Yang stood up from the human section. She was a xenopsychologist who studied how different species interacted. If I may address that concern? Taiyang nodded, and she walked to the center. I have been studying the effects of Hannah's activities for the past 2 weeks. The data is fascinating. She projected new information onto the screen. Charts and graphs appeared showing behavioral patterns. Juvenile behavioral problems on this station have decreased by 34%. Reports of fighting, vandalism, and distress among younglings have dropped significantly. Do you know why? She pointed to an image of younglings from different species sitting together, sharing cookies and talking. Because they have a gathering place now? Because they have something to share. Because Hannah's cafe has become a neutral space where different species interact positively. More data appeared. Interspecies friendships among juveniles have increased by 300%. Parents from different species are talking to each other for the first time. Pip the Voroxy cub has started something called a Cookie Club. It's the station's first multi-species youth organization. They meet weekly, share food from different cultures, and discuss their experiences. Dr. Sora looked at the council members. Humans have been part of the galactic community for only 80 years. We are newcomers, but we bring something valuable. We bring the understanding that efficiency is not the same as fulfillment, that optimization is not the same as happiness. She gestured to Hannah. This baker has done more for interspecies relations on this station in 2 months than official diplomatic programs have done in 2 years. And she did it with cookies and kindness. The Tholen merchant stood again, frustrated. You speak of emotions and relationships, but these are not measurable. They have no economic value? This human cannot sustain her activities. She will run out of resources. She will burn out? Then what? Then all these younglings she has created dependencies in will suffer. Then we help her, Administrator Taiyang said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at him. The problem is not what Hannah is doing. The problem is that she's doing it alone. He looked at the council members. We have a choice. We can shut this down and return to our efficient, optimized, joyless existence. Or we can learn from it. We can ask ourselves why our own cultures abandon things like this. We can question whether we lost something important in our pursuit of efficiency. One of the council members, the elderly Asari with feathers, stood up. I vote to grant the human a formal cultural exchange permit. More than that, I vote to allocate resources to support her activities. Let this be an official program. Let us see what happens when we prioritize connection over efficiency. The Vryn council member raised a tentacle. I second this motion, but I propose we expand it. Let the human train others. Let other species learn this baking art. Let us all share in this cultural exchange. One by one, the council members voted. Some were reluctant. Some were enthusiastic. But in the end, the vote was clear. 8 votes in favor. 4 votes against. Hannah's activities were officially recognized. She would receive support, supplies, and space to expand. But more than that, the council agreed to something unprecedented. They agreed to learn. As the hearing ended, the Tholen merchant approached Hannah. She expected him to be angry. But instead he looked thoughtful. I still believe you are inefficient, he said. But perhaps I do not understand everything about efficiency. He paused, his crystalline form shifting colors slightly. Would you teach me to bake? I wish to understand what my children feel when they eat your cookies. Hannah smiled, tears in her eyes. Of course. Come by tomorrow. I'll show you. Outside the chamber, 200 younglings were waiting. When they heard the news, the corridor erupted in celebration. Pip ran to Hannah and hugged her legs, his tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. You can stay, he said, his voice full of joy. You can keep making cookies. Yes, Hannah said, picking him up and holding him close. I can keep making cookies. For you and for everyone. And in that moment she understood something important. She hadn't just been making cookies. She had been building bridges. One small, sweet, perfectly baked bridge at a time. 3 months had passed since the council hearing. Hannah stood in front of her new cafe and smiled. It was 5 times bigger than her old one, with large windows and enough space for 50 people to sit comfortably. The sign above the door read Hannah's Kitchen in 12 different languages, but the biggest change wasn't the building. It was the people inside. 15 beings from different species worked in her kitchen, all wearing aprons that Pip had helped design. There was Velker, who had quit his cargo job to learn baking full-time. The 3 Thraxi siblings who had been among her first customers now worked the morning shift. Even the Tholen merchant, whose name was Quill, came twice a week to learn new techniques. The line still existed. But now it was organized, manageable, and joyful. Younglings waited patiently in a queue. That wound through a garden area that the station had created specially for this purpose. While they waited, they could play, draw, or read books from the small library that had been set up. Ji-hun managed the schedule now. He had quit his docking bay job to help Hannah full-time. He discovered he had a talent for organization and teaching. Under his guidance, the kitchen ran smoothly, producing hundreds of cookies every day, but they weren't just making Earth-style cookies anymore. Hannah watched as Velker pulled a tray from the oven. These were special cookies he had developed himself, combining Earth baking techniques with traditional Velruxy spices. They smelled like cinnamon and something else, something wild and forest-like that reminded Hannah of autumn. How do they look? Velker asked nervously. Even after 3 months, he still sought her approval? Perfect, Hannah said, and she meant a dot in the corner. The Thraxi siblings were making cookies with crystallized honey from their hive. The honey had to be processed carefully because it was too strong for most species, but they had figured out how to dilute it just right. The result was cookies that tasted like flowers and sunshine. Quill, the Tholen merchant, was working on something even more experimental. He was trying to create cookies that silicon-based species could eat safely. It required special equipment and ingredients that were basically rocks, but he was determined. If Draxi can enjoy cookies, he had told Hana, then maybe there is hope for my species to remember joy too. The door opened and Pip walked in, carrying a stack of papers. He was taller now, more confident. He wore his cookie assistant badge with pride, though his role had expanded far beyond helping in line. Hana, he said excitedly, look at this. He spread the papers on the counter. They were messages from other stations. 3 nearby stations had heard about what was happening on Kepler 9 and wanted to start similar programs. They're asking if we can send teachers, Pip said. They want to learn the baking art. Hana felt overwhelmed. This had started with one lonely cub and one cookie. Now it was spreading across space. Ji-hun came over, reading the messages. We should do it. We have enough trained bakers now. We could send Velkar to Station Helios. The Thraxi siblings could go to Port Meridian. What about you? Hana asked Velkar. Would you want to go to another station? Teach others? Velkar looked at his cub, then back at Hana. 2 months ago, I was just a cargo loader with no hope. Now I'm a baker. I am an artist. I have time to spend with my cub, and I do work that brings joy to others. He placed a paw on her shoulder. Yes, I would be honored to teach others, to spread what you have taught me. That evening, after the cafe closed, something special happened. The station administrator, Taiyang, came by with several council members. They were carrying official-looking documents. We have something to show you, Taiyang said. He pulled up a holographic display. It showed statistics from the past 3 months. Crime rates were down across the station. Productivity was actually up, not down like the critics had predicted. Medical reports showed decreased stress levels among both adults and juveniles. But that's not the most interesting part, said Dr. Sora, who had come along. She pulled up different data. Look at this. Communication between different species has increased dramatically. We're seeing cooperation and friendship between groups that historically avoided each other. She pointed to a specific graph. The younglings who come to your cafe are now organizing their own cultural exchange programs. They're teaching each other their languages. They're sharing their customs. Your cookie club has spawned 12 other interspecies clubs focusing on art, music, sports, and science. The elderly Osari council member smiled with her beaked face. You have created something we thought impossible, human. You have created community. I just made cookies, Hana said, feeling embarrassed. No, Taiyang said firmly. You did much more than that. You showed us that we had optimized our lives to the point where we forgot how to live. You reminded us that connection matters, that kindness matters, that taking time to make something special for someone else is not wasteful, it's essential. He handed her an official document. The Galactic Council has been watching what's happening here. They want to create an official program called Culinary Diplomacy. You would be the director. You would have resources to expand this across multiple stations and colonies. Hana stared at the document. Her hands were shaking. I don't know if I can handle something that big. You won't be alone, Ji-hun said, standing beside her. You taught all of us. Now we can help you teach others. Velkar nodded. The student becomes the teacher. This is the way of growth. That night, after everyone had left, Hana sat in her cafe with just Pip. The little Velroxy was working on a drawing, his tongue sticking out in concentration. What are you making? Hana asked. A picture of how it all started, Pip said. He turned the paper around. It showed a small cub sitting alone on a bench, and a human woman walking toward him with a cookie. The image was simple but captured something important. The loneliness before and the connection after. Can I keep this one? Hana asked. Pip nodded. Of course. It's our story. 5 years later, the impact was impossible to ignore. The culinary diplomacy program was active on 847 stations and colonies. Thousands of beings had been trained in baking and cooking arts. Each culture added their own traditions and flavors, creating a beautiful fusion of techniques and tastes. Hana's cookbook, Baking Across the Stars, had become a bestseller on 40 worlds. But more importantly, it had inspired others to share their own food traditions. Cookbooks from dozens of species were now being published and exchanged. The cookie club that Pip had started, it had evolved into the Interspecies Youth Council. Young beings from different species met regularly to discuss issues, share ideas, and work on projects together. Last month, they had successfully lobbied for better educational programs on 12 stations. Pip himself was now a teenager, studying to become a professional chef. He wanted to open his own cafe someday. Combining Velrixy and human cooking traditions, Velker ran a successful bakery on Station Helios and had trained 50 other beings in the baking arts. The Thraxi siblings had written a thesis on how food sharing affects social bonding, which was being studied by xenopsychologists across the galaxy. Even Quill the Tholan had changed. His research on silicon-based cookies had led to breakthroughs in cross-species nutrition. He was now working with scientists to develop food that any species could safely enjoy. Ng. He had become the program's administrator, managing the network of culinary ambassadors across the galaxy. He still made time to bake, though, usually working beside Hana in the early morning hours before the cafe opened. On this particular morning, a transport ship arrived at Kepler 9. A family of refugees stepped off, looking tired and scared. They were Milvari, a species Hana had never seen before. They had fled their homeworld due to civil conflict. Among them was a small child, no bigger than Pip had been 5 years ago. The child looked lost and afraid, holding tight to their parents' hand. Hannah watched them from her cafe window. She saw the way the child's eyes were downcast, the way they seemed to be trying to disappear. She recognized the look. It was the same look Pip had worn when she first met him. Without hesitation, Hannah went to her kitchen. She pulled out flour, sugar, butter, and the special ingredients she had researched for Milvari physiology. She mixed and shaped and baked with the same care she had given to that very first cookie when the cookies came out of the oven. Golden and perfect, she put one on a small plate. Then she walked outside, crossing the platform to where the refugee family stood. Uncertain and overwhelmed, the child looked up at her with large, fearful eyes. "Hello," Hannah said softly, kneeling down to the child's level. "My name is Hannah. Welcome to Kepler 9. I made something for you." She held out the cookie. The child stared at it, confused and cautious. Their parents started to speak, probably to refuse on their child's behalf, but then the child reached out one small hand. They took the cookie carefully, sniffed it, and took a tiny bite. Their eyes went wide. Their whole body relaxed. And for the first time since arriving at the station, they smiled. Behind Hannah, Pip stood in the cafe doorway, watching. He was taller now, almost grown. But he remembered exactly how that moment felt. The surprise, the joy, the sudden understanding that someone cared. "Would you like to see where we make these?" Hannah asked the child gently. "We have lots more. And maybe you can help us bake tomorrow if you'd like."